They say marriage is like a house of cards. One wrong move and everything comes tumbling down. What they don't tell you is that sometimes your wife is the one holding the matches, and her sister is standing there with a can of gasoline, both of them grinning like they just won the lottery. My name is Eric Mallard, and I used to think I had the perfect life. 45 years old, finance manager at Peterson & Associates, married to Marta for 22 years, 2 kids in college, nice house in Bloomington, Minnesota. The kind of suburban success story that makes your neighbors simultaneously envious and bored to tears. But perfection, I've learned, is just another word for too stupid to see what's really going on. It started 3 months ago on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday in my carefully orchestrated existence. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing quarterly reports, while Marta bustled around getting ready for work. She worked as a creative director at Pinnacle Marketing, a boutique ad agency downtown. 20 years she'd been climbing that ladder, and I was proud of her success, even if it meant she came home later and later these days. "Don't forget dinner with Victoria tonight," she said, not looking up from her phone as she spoke. Her fingers were flying across the screen with the intensity of a concert pianist. Victoria, my sister-in-law. If Marta was champagne, Victoria was cheap wine that somehow cost twice as much. 47 years old, twice divorced, and possessed of the remarkable ability to make every conversation about either her money or someone else's lack thereof. "Right," I said, closing my laptop with perhaps more force than necessary. Dinner with Victoria. The highlight of my week. Marta finally looked up, and I caught something in her expression, a flicker of annoyance that seemed disproportionate to my mild sarcasm. "She's family, Eric, and she's going through a difficult time." Victoria's difficult time involved her second divorce settlement, which had left her with a house in Edina worth more than most people's retirement funds and enough alimony to fund a small country's defense budget. But sure, difficult. "Of course," I said. "I'll try to contain my enthusiasm." That earned me a look that could have frozen Lake Minnetonka in July. Marta grabbed her purse, a new one I noticed, leather that probably cost more than my car payment, and headed for the door. "I might be late tonight," she called over her shoulder. "Big presentation tomorrow." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with my coffee and a growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with my perfect life. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but there were signs. Little things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a pattern I didn't want to acknowledge. The new perfume, for instance. Marta had worn the same scent for 15 years, something French and subtle that I'd given her for our anniversary. But lately she smelled different, sharper, more aggressive. Then there were the clothes. My wife had always dressed professionally, but modestly. Lately her wardrobe had taken on a noticeably more daring vibe. Tighter skirts, lower necklines, shoes that clicked on the floor with a sound that could wake the whole neighborhood. And the phone. God, the phone. It might as well have been surgically attached to her hand. She slept with it, showered with it, probably would have taken it to her own funeral if she could figure out how to live-tweet the experience. But the biggest change was in how she looked at me. Or rather, how she didn't. It was like I'd gradually faded from full color to sepia to complete transparency. I was becoming the ghost of husbands past, haunting my own house. I finished my coffee and got ready for work, trying to shake off the feeling that my life was slowly unraveling. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was normal after 22 years of marriage. Maybe everyone felt like they were living with a polite stranger who happened to share their mortgage. Work provided its usual blend of spreadsheets and small talk, but I found myself distracted. Around noon, my best friend Dave called. "Lunch?" he asked without preamble. Dave Patterson was a man of few words, most of them profane. He ran a small construction company and had the kind of straightforward worldview that I envied. Problems had solutions. If something was broken, you fixed it. If it couldn't be fixed, you threw it away and got a new one. "Can't," I said. Swamped. "Bullshit. You're thinking too much again. I can hear it in your voice." Dave had known me since college. We'd been roommates, best man at each other's weddings, godfathers to each other's kids. He could read me like a financial statement, and right now, apparently, I was showing a deficit. "Marta's acting weird," I found myself saying. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Different, distant, like she's got a secret." There was a pause. "Women always have secrets, Eric. The question is whether it's the kind of secret that matters." "What do you mean?" "I mean, some secrets are, I bought you a birthday present and hid it in the closet, and some secrets are, I've been screwing your brother and we're moving to Tahiti. You need to figure out which kind you're dealing with." Dave had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things that was both helpful and terrifying. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. "Sure it is. Look, you want my advice? Pay attention. Really pay attention. Not the way you usually do, like you're watching TV while reading a book while thinking about work. I mean focus. Women leave clues everywhere. You just have to be smart enough to see them. After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, Dave's words echoing in my head. Pay attention, focus, look for clues. Maybe it was time to start acting like the detective in my own life, instead of just a bystander. That evening, dinner with Victoria was exactly as excruciating as I'd expected. She'd chosen some trendy place downtown where the portions were small, the prices were large, and the waitstaff treated you like you should be grateful they'd allowed you to exist in their presence. Victoria held court from the moment we sat down, regaling us with tales of her lawyer's brilliance, her ex-husband's stupidity, and her plans for redecorating her already perfect house. I'm thinking of doing the whole thing in white, she announced, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass. Very minimalist, very pure. Very impractical, I muttered, earning another one of Marta's looks. Eric doesn't understand aesthetics, Marta said to her sister, and there was something in her tone, a dismissiveness that felt like a slap. Men rarely do, Victoria replied, as if I weren't sitting right there. They're so practical, so literal. They don't understand that sometimes you need to completely reinvent yourself. I watched my wife nod in agreement, and something cold settled in my stomach. Reinvent yourself. Was that what this was about? The conversation continued around me, but I found myself studying Marta like I was seeing her for the first time. The new haircut, shorter, more modern. The makeup, heavier, more dramatic. The way she kept checking her phone, smiling at messages she didn't share. Her wedding ring was gone, not just off her finger. Gone. The little indent where it had sat for 22 years was still there, like a ghost of promises past, but the ring itself had vanished. "Where's your ring?" I asked, interrupting Victoria mid-sentence about her plans for a new kitchen. Marta looked down at her hand as if she'd never seen it before. "Oh, that. I took it to be cleaned. The diamond was looking cloudy. It was a reasonable explanation, perfectly logical, completely believable, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was a lie. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 22 years of marriage. I went through Marta's things. Not in a creepy, obsessive way. At least, that's what I told myself. I was just curious. About the ring. About the changes. About the growing distance between us that felt like a canyon I couldn't cross. I started with her jewelry box, a wooden antique that had belonged to her grandmother. The ring wasn't there, but that didn't surprise me. If it was really being cleaned, it would be at the jeweler's. What did surprise me was what I found in the small drawer at the bottom. A receipt from Hennepin Pawn, dated 2 weeks ago. The amount made me dizzy. $3,200 for gold ring with diamond solitaire. I sat on our bed, staring at the piece of paper like it might suddenly make sense. Why would Marta pawn her wedding ring? We weren't hurting for money. My job paid well, her job paid better, and we'd been careful with our finances for decades. Unless she needed cash for something she didn't want me to know about. The thought hit me like a physical blow. An affair. It had to be. All the signs were there. The secrecy, the new clothes, the distance, the lies. And now she was pawning jewelry to pay for... what? Hotel rooms? Gifts for her lover? A new life that didn't include me? I should have confronted her. Should have walked into the kitchen, slammed the receipt down on the counter, and demanded an explanation. Instead, I did what I always did when faced with a problem. I gathered more data. At work, I found myself unable to concentrate. Every spreadsheet looked like evidence of my own stupidity. Every financial projection seemed to mock my inability to see what was happening in my own house. Around 10, I called Dave. "I need a favor," I said without preamble. "Shoot. Can you find out who works at Pinnacle Marketing?" Specifically, who Marta works with closely. There was a pause. "Eric, what the hell are you doing?" "Research." "This is about the weird behavior, isn't it?" I told him about the ring, about the pawn shop receipt, about the growing certainty that my wife was having an affair. Dave listened without interrupting, which was unlike him. Dave always interrupted. "Shit," he said when I finished. "Yeah. Okay, look, I know a guy who does work for some of the downtown agencies. Let me make a call." 2 hours later, Dave called back with a name, Jake Turnbull. 28 years old, account manager at Pinnacle, divorced, drove a red Porsche, and according to Dave's contact, had a reputation for sleeping with married women. "He's worked there about 6 months," Dave said. "Word is, he's ambitious and not particularly concerned about whose husband he steps on to get ahead." Jake Turnbull. The name felt like poison in my mouth. That evening, I watched Marta get ready for another late night at the office. She'd showered and changed clothes, something she never used to do after work. The new perfume filled the bathroom like a declaration of war. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt like they were already somewhere else. After she left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the artifacts of our life together. Wedding photos, family vacations, Christmas mornings with the kids. 22 years of history that apparently meant less than whatever Jake Turnbull was offering. I thought about calling the kids. Amelia was at Northwestern, studying journalism. Ross was in his second year of medical school at the University of Minnesota. They deserved to know what was happening to their family. But what would I tell them? That I suspected their mother was cheating? That I'd found a pawn shop receipt and jumped to conclusions? That their father was sitting alone in the dark, feeling sorry for himself? Instead, I did something that would have been unthinkable a week ago. I drove to Pinnacle Marketing. The office was in a converted warehouse in the North Loop, all exposed brick and industrial chic. Very trendy, very now, the kind of place where young, ambitious people like Jake Turnbull seduced other men's wives. Marta's BMW was in the parking lot. Next to it, gleaming under the streetlights like a red flag, was a Porsche 911. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the building, feeling like a character in a bad detective novel. What was I hoping to see? Marta and Jake walking out together, kissing in the parking lot, making plans for their future while I sat there like an idiot, finally understanding what everyone else had probably figured out months ago. At 11:30, they emerged. Together. Marta looked different, younger, more animated. She was laughing at something Jake had said, her hand on his arm in a way that was casual and intimate, and completely devastating. Jake Turnbull was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average, athletic where I was soft, confident where I was careful. He had the kind of easy charm that made people want to be around him, the kind of magnetism that could make a woman forget she had a husband waiting at home. They talked for a few minutes by their cars, and then Jake leaned in and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a real kiss, the kind that meant something, the kind I hadn't gotten from my wife in months. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications. It wasn't just an affair, it was a relationship. Marta wasn't just cheating, she was falling in love with someone else. The house felt different when I walked in, like a museum of my former life. Everything was the same, but nothing meant what it used to. The kitchen where we'd shared breakfast that morning was now the place where she'd lied to my face. The bedroom where we'd slept side by side for 2 decades was now the place where she planned her deception. I poured myself a scotch, a good one, from the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat down to think. I could confront her, of course, demand an explanation, insist on counseling, fight for my marriage. But what was the point? She'd already made her choice. The ring in the pawn shop, the lies, the late nights, it was all leading to the same inevitable conclusion. Or I could do nothing. Pretend I didn't know? Hope it would burn itself out, wait for her to come back to me. But I'd seen the way she looked at him. She wasn't coming back, which left option 3. I could beat them at their own game. Dave's words echoed in my head. If something's broken and can't be fixed, you throw it away and get a new one. Maybe it was time to throw away my old life and get a new one. Maybe it was time to stop being the victim and start being the author of my own story. Maybe it was time to show Marta and Jake Turnbull what happens when you underestimate Eric Mallard. I finished my scotch and went to bed, but not to sleep. I had plans to make. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. I went through the motions of normal life, work, dinner, small talk with Marta, while secretly gathering intelligence like a suburban spy. I learned that Jake Turnbull lived in a condo in Uptown, drove his Porsche like he was auditioning for Fast and Furious, and had a gym membership he used religiously. I learned that he'd been married briefly in his early 20s, divorced after his wife caught him cheating, and had left a trail of broken relationships across 3 different advertising agencies. I also learned that Marta had opened a new credit card, one I wasn't supposed to know about, and had been using it for restaurants I'd never heard of, hotels I'd never been to, and purchases that had nothing to do with our shared life. But the most important thing I learned was that I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Not just hurt, angry. The kind of cold, calculating fury that makes you dangerous in ways you never thought possible. On Thursday evening, Marta announced she was going to a work conference in Duluth over the weekend. "It's a last-minute thing," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Team-building exercises, strategic planning, that sort of thing." "Sounds important," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It is." The whole account management team will be there. Jake. She'd almost said just Jake, not even trying very hard to hide it anymore. "Well, have fun," I said. "I'll probably just catch up on some reading." That Friday, after Marta left for her fake conference, I put my plan into motion. Step 1, I called Dave. "I need another favor," I said. "Jesus, Eric, you're making me nervous." "What now?" I need to know everything there is to know about Jake Turnbull. Where he goes, what he does, who he talks to. Everything. Eric, and I need to know about his car. Specifically where he parks it and how often he checks on it. There was a long pause. You're not going to do anything stupid, are you? Define stupid. Anything that involves jail time. No jail time, I promised. Just a little education. Dave sighed. I'll make some calls. Step 2. I drove to Jake's building. The Porsche was parked in the underground garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a red beacon of everything I wasn't. Fast, flashy, expensive. The kind of car that said, I'm young and successful and I take what I want. I walked around it slowly, admiring the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, the way it seemed to crouch like a predator waiting to strike. Beautiful, really. Jake clearly took excellent care of it. It would be a shame if something happened to it. I didn't do anything that night. I just looked, planned, imagined. Step 3. I went home and waited. Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Amelia, calling from Northwestern. Hey, Dad. How's everything? Fine, sweetheart. How's school? Good. Busy. Is Mom around? I tried calling her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. She's at a work conference in Duluth. Team building. Oh. There was something in Amelia's voice. A note of skepticism that suggested she might have inherited my talent for reading between the lines. Well, tell her I called. After we hung up, I realized that Marta hadn't mentioned the conference to the kids. You'd think a mother would tell her children she'd be out of town, even for a weekend, unless she was too distracted by other things to remember, or unless she wasn't actually in Duluth. I spent Saturday researching, not just Jake and Marta, but the whole situation. I read articles about infidelity, about divorce law in Minnesota, about the psychology of betrayal. I wanted to understand not just what was happening, but why. What I learned wasn't comforting. According to the experts, affairs like this, emotional as well as physical, involving coworkers, lasting for months, rarely ended with the cheating spouse returning to the marriage. Usually, they ended with divorce papers and custody battles and the division of assets accumulated over decades of shared life, which meant I was probably looking at the end of everything I'd built since I was 23 years old. Sunday evening, Marta returned from her conference, full of stories about team-building exercises and strategic planning sessions. She seemed energized, glowing, like she'd spent the weekend at a spa instead of a corporate retreat. How was Duluth? I asked over dinner. Productive. Really productive. We accomplished a lot. I'll bet. What hotel did you stay at? The Radisson. She didn't hesitate, didn't look away. Either she was an excellent liar, or she'd prepared for this question. Nice place. I stayed there once for a conference. Great view of the lake from the restaurant. Yes, it was beautiful. The Radisson in Duluth had been closed for renovations for 3 months. I'd checked. That night, after Marta fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been lying to me. Weeks, months, years? And I wondered if she felt anything at all. Guilt, regret, sadness for what we were losing, or if I'd already become so irrelevant to her life that deceiving me was just another item on her daily to-do list. Monday morning, I made a decision. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in my entire career, and drove to Jake's building. The Porsche was there, parked in its usual spot, waiting for its owner to finish his morning workout at the gym. I had about an hour. I didn't key the car, or slash the tires, or do any of the obvious things a wronged husband might do. Instead, I did something much more subtle, and in its way, much more devastating. I had business cards printed, lots of them. They read, Jake Turnbull, home wrecker for hire, specializing in destroying marriages and betraying trust. Call for a free consultation. I scattered them under windshield wipers throughout the parking garage, posted them on bulletin boards in the building's lobby, and left a stack on the reception desk of Jake's gym. Then I went home and waited. The call came at 2:30. Eric? Marta's voice was tight with panic. We need to talk. About what? You know about what? Jake's been getting calls all day. Someone put up flyers about him all over his building. That's terrible. Who would do such a thing? Eric, please. Don't play games. We need to discuss this like adults. Adults? Right. Because adults have affairs and lie about conferences and pawn their wedding rings to pay for hotel rooms. Come home, I said. We'll talk. She arrived an hour later, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 5 hours. Jake was with her, which was bold or stupid, possibly both. I opened the door and looked at them standing on my porch, my wife and her lover, united in their outrage at being exposed. Hello, Jake. I said pleasantly. "I've heard so much about you." He was even more impressive in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having been seriously challenged. But there was something else in his eyes now. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. Good. "Mr. Mallard," he said, extending his hand. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I stared at his hand as if it were a lifeless fish. "No, I don't think there has been." We sat in my living room, the same room where Marta and I had celebrated anniversaries, opened Christmas presents, planned our children's futures. Now it felt like a courtroom where I was simultaneously judge, jury, and prosecutor. "Eric," Marta began, "I know you're upset." "Upset?" I laughed, and the sound surprised all of us with its bitterness. "I'm not upset, Marta. Upset is when the Vikings lose in the playoffs. This is something else entirely." Jake leaned forward, trying to take control of the conversation. "Look, Mr. Mallard, I understand you're angry, but what you did today was harassment. It could have serious consequences for both of us professionally." "Consequences?" I repeated. "That's interesting. You sleep with my wife for months. She pawns her wedding ring to pay for your little adventures, and you're worried about consequences?" Marta's face went white. "How did you know about the ring? About Duluth? About the credit card?" I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and set it on the coffee table. "I'm a finance manager, Marta. I'm very good at following money trails." Jake's confidence was evaporating by the second. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" I stood up, suddenly feeling 10 feet tall. "I want my wife to stop lying to me. I want you to find another job, preferably in another state. And I want both of you to understand that I'm not the pathetic, clueless husband you thought I was." "Eric," Marta said quietly, "I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and now we all have to live with the consequences." They left 20 minutes later, Jake's arm around Marta's shoulders in a gesture that was probably meant to be protective, but looked more like a retreat. I watched them drive away, Jake following Marta in his wounded Porsche, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: satisfaction. The war was just beginning. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I doubt Sun Tzu ever had to deal with cheating spouses and red sports cars. Jake, it turned out, was not as resilient as his confident exterior suggested. The business cards had rattled him more than I'd expected. According to Dave, who was now fully invested in what he called Operation Payback, Jake had spent most of Tuesday fielding calls from confused potential clients and explaining to his gym buddies why someone thought he was a professional home wrecker. "He's starting to crack," Dave reported over lunch Wednesday. "My guy at the agency says he's been jumpy all week, looking over his shoulder like he expects you to pop out of a filing cabinet." "Good," I said. "Fear makes people make mistakes." "Speaking of mistakes, what's your next move?" I'd been thinking about that. The business cards were just the first move, a way to show them I wasn't going to back down. But if I really wanted to make a difference, I needed to be smarter, more calculated. "Tell me about Jake's ex-wife," I said. Dave grinned. "Now you're thinking like a winner." Her name was Rebecca Hartley, and she lived in St. Paul with their 8-year-old daughter. According to Dave's research, she'd divorced Jake 3 years ago after catching him in bed with a coworker, a pattern that was apparently as predictable as Minnesota winters. More importantly, she was still bitter about it. I called her that evening after Marta had left for another late night at the office. "Mrs. Hartley?" "This is Eric Mallard. I believe you know my wife, Marta." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "She works with your ex-husband at Pinnacle Marketing. They've been collaborating on several projects recently." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. "I see. And you're calling me because I thought you should know that Jake is up to his old tricks? And because I thought you might be interested in making sure he faces some consequences this time?" Rebecca Hartley, it turned out, was very interested indeed. We met the next day at a coffee shop in Highland Park. She was attractive in a tired way, with the look of someone who'd been through a war and lived to tell about it. More importantly, she had the kind of focused anger that comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted. "He hasn't changed," she said after I'd explained the situation. "I knew he wouldn't. Men like Jake don't change. They just find new victims." "I'm sorry about what happened to your marriage." She shrugged. "I'm not. Best thing that ever happened to me, actually. But I am sorry about yours. It's not over yet." "What do you mean?" I told her about my plans. Not all of them, but enough to give her a sense of where I was heading. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said when I finished. "They started it." "Fair enough." What do you need from me? What I needed was information about Jake's habits, his weaknesses, his pressure points, about the places he went and the people he talked to, about his finances and his ambitions and his fears. Rebecca was a treasure trove of intelligence. He's obsessed with that car, she said. Bought it right after our divorce was finalized, like it was some kind of trophy. He spends more on detailing it than most people spend on groceries. What else? He's terrified of his boss. Guy named David Millant runs the agency like his personal kingdom. Very old school, very conservative. The kind of man who doesn't approve of office affairs, especially when they involve married women. Interesting. Jake's also paranoid about his reputation. He likes to think of himself as a smooth operator, but he's actually pretty insecure. The business card thing probably hit him harder than you realize. We talked for 2 hours, and by the time we parted ways, I had enough ammunition to keep Jake Turnbull awake at night for weeks. That evening, Marta came home earlier than usual, looking troubled. "We need to talk," she said, setting her purse down with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd been rehearsing this conversation. "About what?" "About us. About what's happening to our marriage." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't expected. Uncertainty. For the first time in months, Marta seemed unsure of herself. "What about our marriage?" She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "I know you're angry about Jake." "Am I?" "Eric, please, don't make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not making anything hard, Marta. I'm just trying to understand what's happening in my own house." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in weeks. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "But it did happen." "Yes. And you're in love with him." She flinched like I'd slapped her. It's not that simple, isn't it? You're having an affair with Jake Turnbull. You've been lying to me for months. You pawned your wedding ring to pay for hotel rooms. What part of that is complicated? The part where I don't know what I want anymore. And there it was, the truth, finally. Not an apology or an explanation, but a confession of confusion. Marta wasn't leaving me for Jake. She was lost, caught between two lives, unable to choose, which made her vulnerable. "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "I want you to understand that I'm trying to figure this out, that I need time to think." "How much time?" "I don't know." I stood up, suddenly tired of the conversation. "Well, while you're thinking, I'll be planning." "Planning what?" I smiled, and something in my expression made her lean back in her chair. "My future. With or without you." That night, I put the next phase of my plan into action. I created a fake email account and sent a message to David Millant, Jake's boss at Pinnacle Marketing. The subject line was simple: concerns about employee conduct. The message was longer: "Mr. Millant, I feel compelled to bring to your attention some concerning behavior by one of your employees, Jake Turnbull. Mr. Turnbull has been engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a married colleague, which has created a hostile work environment and reflects poorly on your agency's professional standards. I believe this matter warrants your immediate attention. A concerned observer." I sent it at 2 a.m., knowing that Millant would see it first thing in the morning, before Jake had a chance to spin the situation in his favor. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. The next day, Jake called in sick to work. According to Dave's sources, he'd spent the morning in Millant's office, sweating through what was described as a very uncomfortable conversation. Marta came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck. "Jake's been suspended," she said without preamble. "That's unfortunate." Someone sent an email to his boss. About us. "Really? Who would do such a thing?" She stared at me for a long moment. "This has to stop, Eric." "What has to stop?" "You know what? The games, the harassment, the consequences. This isn't just about Jake and me anymore. Other people are getting hurt." "You're right," I said. "Other people are getting hurt. Me, for instance. Our kids, your reputation, Jake's ex-wife, his daughter. Funny how you didn't worry about that when you were sneaking around behind my back." Marta's composure finally cracked. "What do you want from me?" "You want me to grovel? To beg for forgiveness? Fine. I'm sorry, Eric. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I made a mess of everything. Is that what you want to hear?" "No," I said quietly. "What I want to hear is that you're ending it. Tonight, permanently, and that you're going to spend the next few months figuring out whether you want to save our marriage or end it cleanly." "And if I don't?" I smiled again, and this time she actually flinched. "Then you'll find out just how creative a man can get when he has nothing left to lose." Marta didn't end it with Jake. I knew she wouldn't. People in the middle of an affair are like addicts, incapable of making rational decisions about their drug of choice. But her failure to cut ties gave me the justification I needed for what came next. Over the weekend, while Marta was at Victoria's house thinking about our conversation, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. It started with a phone call to Rebecca Hartley. "I need one more favor," I said. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that ensures Jake Turnbull never hurts another family." There was a pause. "I'm listening." What I proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Jake's greatest weakness wasn't his ego or his insecurity. It was his pattern of behavior. He'd cheated on Rebecca. He was cheating with Marta, and according to Rebecca, there had been others in between. The man was a serial adulterer, incapable of maintaining a monogamous relationship for more than a few months, which meant he was probably already looking for his next conquest. "I want you to seduce him," I said. "Excuse me?" "Not actually seduce him. Just make him think you're interested. Text him, call him, suggest meeting for coffee to talk about our daughter. Make him believe you're having second thoughts about the divorce. And then we document everything. Every inappropriate text, every attempt to cheat on Marta with his ex-wife, and we make sure Marta sees it all." Rebecca was quiet for a long time. "You really think this will work?" "I know it will." "Jake can't help himself. It's who he is." "And what about your wife? You really want to hurt her like this?" I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Did I want to hurt Marta? Or did I just want her to see Jake for what he really was? "I want her to make an informed decision," I said finally. "Right now, she thinks she's in love with Prince Charming. I want her to know she's actually sleeping with a toad." Rebecca agreed to help, but on her terms. No involvement in anything inappropriate, nothing that could be used against her in future custody fights, and total deniability if things took a turn for the worse. "Fair enough," I said. "When can you start?" "Tonight?" The first text went out Sunday evening. "Hi, Jake. Hope you're well. Been thinking about our conversation at Emma's school play. Maybe we should talk sometime. Rebecca." Jake's response came within an hour. "Good to hear from you." "I've been thinking about that too. Coffee this week?" By Wednesday, they were texting constantly. Jake, true to form, had jumped at the chance to reconnect with his ex-wife, especially when she hinted that she might have made a mistake in divorcing him. The messages started innocent enough, discussions about their daughter, reminiscences about good times in their marriage. But Jake being Jake, they quickly took a more intimate turn. "I miss what we had," he texted on Thursday night. "I know I screwed up, but maybe we could try again." Rebecca, playing her part perfectly, responded with just enough encouragement to keep him interested. "I miss it too sometimes." Things are so complicated now. By Friday, Jake was suggesting they meet at a hotel to really talk about their future. I had everything I needed. That evening, I called Marta at Victoria's. "We need to talk," I said. "Tonight?" "Eric, I told you I needed time. Time's up. Come home. There's something you need to see." She arrived an hour later, accompanied by Victoria, who swept into my house like she owned it. "Eric," Victoria announced, "we need to discuss this situation like civilized people." "Hello, Victoria. Always a pleasure." Marta looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "What did you want to show me?" I handed her my laptop, open to a folder containing screenshots of every text message between Jake and Rebecca over the past week. "What is this?" she asked, scrolling through the messages. "That's your boyfriend trying to seduce his ex-wife." Marta's face went white as she read. Victoria, reading over her shoulder, made a sound like a deflating balloon. "This can't be real," Marta whispered. "It's real. He started texting her 3 days ago. By tonight, he was suggesting they meet at a hotel." "But he loves me," he said. "He said what you wanted to hear, just like he said what Rebecca wanted to hear when they were married, just like he'll say to the next woman after you." Victoria, for once in her life, was speechless. Marta continued scrolling through the messages, her expression shifting from disbelief to recognition to something that looked like nausea. "How did you get these?" she asked finally. "Does it matter?" She set the laptop down and stared at me. "You orchestrated this. You set him up. I gave him an opportunity to show you who he really is. He took it. This is manipulation, Eric. It's the truth, Marta. This is who Jake Turnbull is. This is who you threw away 22 years of marriage for." Victoria found her voice. "You had no right." "I had every right." The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. "She's my wife. This is my house. My life that's being destroyed. I had every right to defend myself. The room fell silent. Marta was crying now, not the delicate tears of earlier conversations, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere fundamental. "I'm such an idiot," she said. "No," I said quietly. "You're just human. You made a mistake." "A mistake? Eric, I destroyed our marriage for a man who was already planning to cheat on me." Victoria, apparently deciding this was a good time to make her exit, mumbled something about calling later and left, which was fine with me. This conversation needed to happen without an audience. Marta and I sat in our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of our life together, and finally had the honest conversation we should have had months ago. She told me about feeling invisible, about the slow erosion of intimacy in our marriage, about Jake's attention making her feel young and desirable again. I told her about the loneliness, the sense of being taken for granted, the growing distance I hadn't known how to bridge. "I thought you didn't see me anymore," she said. "I thought you didn't want me to see you." We talked until dawn, working through 22 years of accumulated grievances and misunderstandings. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary, like surgery, painful but potentially healing. "What happens now?" she asked as the sun came up. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I know I love you. I know I want to save our marriage. But I also know I can't go back to the way things were. Neither can I. So we figure out a new way forward, together, or we end this cleanly and try to preserve what we can for the kids." Marta was quiet for a long time. What about Jake? What about him? He's going to be furious when he finds out about Rebecca. About the setup. I smiled. Not the bitter, angry smile I'd been wearing for weeks, but something closer to genuine amusement. Let him be furious. He's got bigger problems to worry about. "What do you mean?" "I mean, David Millant is expecting a full report on Monday about Jake's inappropriate workplace relationships, and Rebecca is planning to share those text messages with Jake's daughter's school, where several of the other parents happen to work at advertising agencies around town." Marta stared at me. "You're going to destroy him." "No," I said. "I'm going to let him destroy himself." There's a difference. Monday morning, Jake Turnbull was fired from Pinnacle Marketing. By Tuesday, word of his latest affair, and his attempt to seduce his ex-wife while involved with a married colleague, had spread through the tight-knit Minneapolis advertising community like wildfire. By Wednesday, he'd put his condo on the market and was making plans to move to Chicago, where his reputation hadn't preceded him. The red Porsche, I heard, was sold to pay for the move. As for Marta and me, we started counseling the following week. It's been 6 months now, and I can't say it's been easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight, but we're working on it, day by day, conversation by conversation. The kids know something happened. You can't hide that kind of upheaval from smart young adults, but we've managed to spare them the ugly details. They're both home for Christmas break now, and for the first time in months, our house feels like a home again. Victoria, incidentally, has been conspicuously absent from family gatherings. Apparently, she's been too busy with her own drama to worry about ours. Something about her second ex-husband challenging the divorce settlement. Karma, as they say, is a patient creditor. Last week, I ran into Rebecca Hartley at the grocery store. She looked good, relaxed, confident, like a woman who'd finally closed a difficult chapter in her life. "How are things?" she asked. "Better," I said. "Complicated, but better. You?" "Jake moved to Chicago last month. Emma's doing better without the constant drama." "I'm glad," she smiled. "You know, I was wrong about what I said that day at the coffee shop." "About what?" "About you playing a dangerous game." "You weren't playing a game at all. You were fighting for your family." As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about her words. Had I been fighting for my family? Or had I just been fighting? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the important thing was that when my marriage was threatened, when my life was falling apart, when everything I'd built over 2 decades was at risk, I didn't just roll over and accept defeat. I fought back, and I won. Not the way I'd expected to win. Not by destroying my enemies or proving my superiority. I won by forcing everyone involved to confront the truth about themselves and their choices. Jake had to face the fact that he was a serial cheater incapable of genuine commitment. Marta had to acknowledge that she'd nearly thrown away a good marriage for a fantasy. And I had to admit that I'd been sleepwalking through my own life, taking my wife's love for granted and failing to nurture the relationship that mattered most to me. The truth, it turns out, really can set you free, even when it hurts like hell. Tonight, Marta and I are going out to dinner, our first real date in over a year. We're not the same people we were a year ago, and our marriage isn't the same either. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe the second version will be better than the first. As for Jake Turnbull, I heard through Dave that he's working at a small agency in Chicago now, driving a used Honda and living in a studio apartment. No more Porsche, no more corner office, no more married women impressed by his smooth talk and expensive toys. Just a middle-aged man starting over, hopefully with a better understanding of the consequences of his choices. I don't hate him anymore. I don't think about him much at all, actually. He was a problem in my life, and I solved it. Now I'm focused on more important things, like rebuilding my marriage, reconnecting with my kids, and figuring out what the next chapter of my life is going to look like. It's funny how quickly you can go from feeling powerless to feeling in control of your destiny. All it takes is the willingness to stop being a victim and start being the author of your own story. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to write a happy ending after all.